Amid the global confusion, something unexpected happened. In a secure underground command center in Tehran, a satellite phone was activated, but not to call Moscow or Beijing. Instead, the supreme leader of Iran asked to speak with Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso, in Ouagadougou. The world was still trying to make sense of the situation when, within the first hour, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared on live TV. He announced firmly, "Iran's nuclear plans won't be ignored. We've taken action." The United States said nothing, but its warships in the Persian Gulf quietly moved into position ready to strike if needed. Oil prices spiked, and across Iraq and Syria, militias backed by Iran responded by firing on American bases. The region was suddenly on fire. But Iran's leaders were worried about more than just missiles. A wave of cyber attacks had hit their systems. Radars were down. Communications were scrambled. Entire sections of their defense network had gone dark. They began to suspect a coordinated assault and more than one enemy at play. With their usual allies like Russia and China staying cautious, Iran made a surprising move. They turned to Africa. They turned to Traoré, a man who had stood his ground against the West. The secure call traveled through 3 layers of encrypted satellites before reaching the presidential compound in Ouagadougou. President Traoré was in a high-level meeting with his generals, reviewing reports of strange drone activity near their northern border and a sharp rise in online attacks targeting his government. Then came a knock. A senior aide walked in, holding a secure red phone. No words were needed. The look on his face said it all. Traoré took the call immediately. The room went silent. On the other end was a calm, serious voice. "President Traoré," the Iranian leader said, "we're on the brink. If we fall, Africa will be next." There was a long pause, not out of fear, but deep thought. Every word now carried global weight. Iran hadn't called Russia or China for a reason. Those countries would urge restraint. But Traoré was different. Iran saw him as bold, independent, and unafraid to make real moves. Traoré's own intelligence had already picked up on troubling patterns: Israeli Mossad agents posing as aid workers in the Sahel, French drones still flying over Niger. Even after France was kicked out, Burkina Faso had refused to be part of the West's military network. That made Traoré both a threat and a potential game-changer. To Iran, this wasn't just about survival. It was a test. Would Africa stay neutral and allow Western powers to dominate or take a stand? Even one African leader speaking up could shift the balance. That was Iran's belief. If someone with real influence in the region stood tall, it would send a powerful message to the world. Iran no longer thought this war would be decided in Tel Aviv or Washington. It could begin in Ouagadougou. The voice on the secure call didn't plead or manipulate. It was calm, steady, the voice of a leader under pressure, reaching out to another who had already weathered many storms. "This isn't a request for weapons," President Kam said. "It's a call for unity. They want to cut us off. But if Africa stands with us, we are not isolated, we are awakened." Traoré stood silent for a moment, staring straight ahead. Then he answered, "You speak of shared struggle, but where was Iran when the Sahel was bleeding under colonial rule?" The line stayed quiet. Then Traoré continued, "Today is not about the past, it's about power. And today, you call because you know Africa's voice can no longer be ignored." He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. Instead, he the entire conversation. "If we're going to stand with you, it can't be in secret," he said. "No hidden deals. The world must see Iran treating Africa as an equal." Silence again. Then Kam answered with a single sentence, "Then let the world see." What followed wasn't shown on any news broadcast, but the impact was massive. Within an hour, Iran sent encrypted intelligence files directly to Burkina Faso's defense ministry. The contents were shocking. A secret French drone base, long denied by Paris, was found operating in Niger. Israeli digital fingerprints were uncovered in malware that had targeted African government servers. There were even intercepted NATO communications discussing how to contain Sahelian nations. Traoré's top security officials were stunned. This wasn't just a Middle East conflict anymore. The war had already reached Africa quietly behind the scenes. Traoré moved quickly. He banned all Western military flights over Burkina Faso. Emergency messages were sent to Mali and Niger. A regional summit was called, with one urgent topic on the table: how to survive what was coming. But something new had already begun forming. Not an alliance with the East, not obedience to the West, but a third path for the countries that had always been left out. The reaction across Africa was mixed. Mali, already closely tied to Burkina Faso, backed the move. Guinea followed soon. After, others hesitated, afraid of economic pressure or political backlash. Meanwhile, Western media exploded with headlines. Burkina Faso aligns with Iran. But the real story was deeper than alliances. It was about a shift in global power, and Africa refusing to stay silent any longer. Experts argued over what had just happened. Was it a declaration of war, just a symbolic move? The U.S. State Department released a vague statement warning about regional instability. At the United Nations, African diplomats were surrounded by questions. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Conakry, something very different was unfolding. Crowds gathered. They chanted Traoré's name. Posters went up showing his face next to bold phrases. "We will not kneel. Africa will decide." For years, the West had ignored the quiet strength of standing alone. Now, it feared the power of standing together. Inside his compound, President Traoré held another private meeting. But this time, it wasn't just his military or cabinet. He invited religious leaders, student voices, and traditional chiefs. He wanted more than top-down orders. He wanted national unity. "We've been given a voice in a war that was never ours," he told them. "But if we stay silent, they'll come for us next, not with bombs, but with blockades, lies, and puppets." An elder stood up and said simply, "Then speak, son, and let the world hear the voice." They tried to silence. That night, Traoré delivered a televised address, not just to Burkina Faso but to the entire world. "Burkina Faso does not choose war, but we choose justice. And when the oppressed call, we answer not as tools, but as equals." Within hours, Iran's state broadcaster aired the speech across the Middle East. The image of an African leader, standing firm, spread rapidly across global media. It became a symbol. Back in Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu responded at a press conference, calling Traoré's comments dangerous ignorance. He warned, "Those who stand with our enemies will face the consequences," but his words didn't carry the same weight they once did. The world was changing. Traoré hadn't just backed Iran, he'd made Iran respect Africa. In doing so, he created something new, a third path, not east, not west, but a voice from the global south, independent, clear, and unafraid. And while missiles continued to fly over Tehran, and drones circled above the Red Sea, a quiet signal had already been sent. The balance of power no longer belonged only to the old empires. It now included voices that had been ignored for too long, voices that were finally awake. What started as a military strike had turned into something much bigger, a global battle over stories and truths. Was this really about nuclear weapons, or was it about the right of nations to stand on their own? Was Iran the threater, the last country daring to defy Western dominance? And where, in all this, did Africa stand? For decades, Africa had been approached only for its resources or as a pawn in global games. But now, in the middle of an international crisis, the continent had become central to the conversation. China and Russia stayed cautious. They didn't fully back Traoré's stance, but they respected his sovereignty. Western analysts rushed to write reports, warning about Africa's dangerous tilt, but they missed the real shift. Africa wasn't siding with Iran, it was siding with itself, and Ibrahim Traoré had become its voice. By the following week, Iran had started to retaliate. U.S. military bases in Syria were attacked. Israeli embassies around the world went into lockdown. A cyberattack disrupted port operations in Haifa. But the most surprising battlefield wasn't military, it was diplomatic. Inside the African Union, quiet conversations began. Could Africa form its own non-aligned coalition, independent of both East and West? Old alliances came under scrutiny. Leaders who had stayed silent now faced pressure at home. In Sudan, students marched through the streets holding signs. Burkina stood up. "What about us?" In South Africa, people openly questioned whether Africa should continue voting with the West at the UN. A political earthquake had begun, not because of bombs or treaties, but because of a single phone call. Weeks passed. No formal deals were signed. No weapons were exchanged. But the world had already changed. Iran was damaged, but still standing. Israel had shown its reach but not its ability to stop the tide. The United States held back, unwilling to dive in fully. And Africa ignored West finally speaking for itself. Ibrahim Traoré had not fired a missile, but he had delivered a message, one that cut deeper than any weapon, that true leadership doesn't wait for permission, that silence, at the right moment, can become betrayal, and that one honest voice, backed by courage and timing, can help reshape history. The world took notice. Embassies reevaluated their strategies, experts rewrote their predictions, and people in once-forgotten corners of the globe began to feel something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not in Iran, not in Israel, not even in war, but in the idea that power isn't just inherited, it's declared. And once declared, it must be protected with wisdom, bravery, and the right timing. In a world divided between two powerful sides, one answer came from the middle. While missiles lit up the skies over the Middle East, a phone rang in West Africa. And when it was answered, everything changed.